The verdict reads as follows as to each count. On count one, it says, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. On counts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Of felony murder, 2 counts, aggravated battery, 2 counts, and cruelty to child in the first degree. Y'all can have a seat.
Case 1, Trinity Poague. On the afternoon of January 14th, 2024, Julian Williams left his 18-month-old son Romeo with his college girlfriend and drove to Walmart to pick up drinks and a pizza. He was gone for 30 minutes. On his way back, his phone buzzed. It was Trinity. She texted him saying Romeo wasn't breathing. He drove straight to the dorm, grabbed his son, and rushed him to the emergency room himself. Doctors tried to stabilize the boy to fly him to a children's hospital in Atlanta. They never could. Romeo Angelus, also known to his family as Jackson Drew, was pronounced dead. Trinity Poague was 18 years old. She was a first-year student at Georgia Southwestern State University and the reigning Miss Donna Adelson, Georgia, a beauty queen who had recently competed at the National Peanut Festival pageant and posted on Instagram about how she had gained the world through her reign. She told investigators the baby had fallen off the bed, a tragic accident, but something didn't add up. Photos and videos taken by Julian just before he left for Walmart showed Romeo in perfect health, laughing with no marks, no bruising, nothing wrong. The medical examiner told a different story entirely. Romeo had a skull fracture, catastrophic brain bleeding, and severe disfigurement to his liver. The injuries were consistent with a direct, forceful blow, not a fall from a bed. Doctors estimated the trauma had occurred 30 to 60 minutes before Romeo arrived at the hospital. Julian had been gone for exactly 30 minutes. Trinity Poague was the only person in that dorm room with him. Then investigators pulled her text messages, and what they found was chilling. In the weeks leading up to Romeo's death, Poague had been texting her roommate about the toddler, saying she hated him and that she wanted to punch him. One message read, "I would want to run him over with my car." A fellow dorm mate testified at trial that she had heard Romeo crying for a very long time that afternoon, and that suddenly, without warning, the crying just stopped. Prosecutors argued that Poague resented Romeo deeply. She wanted her own baby with Julian, not a ready-made family with someone else's child. That resentment, they said, had been building for months. And when Julian left that afternoon and the baby wouldn't stop crying, she snapped. At trial, Poague gave 5 different accounts of what happened. The baby rolled off an air mattress, then fell off the bed, then fell off a chair, before she finally settled on a version that combined multiple stories into one. Each one collapsed under the weight of the medical evidence. And at the hospital, she had told a doctor she had shaken Romeo because he was not acting correctly, an admission that came back to haunt her in court. The jury deliberated for nearly 3 hours. Guilty. When the verdict was read, Poague sobbed in the courtroom. On December 8th, 2025, Trinity Poague was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She was stripped of her Miss Donna Adelson title the day she was arrested. Romeo Angelus was 18 months old. His father left him for 30 minutes. That was all the time it took. Case 2, Donna Adelson. On the morning of July 18th, 2014, Daniel Markell pulled into the garage of his Tallahassee home after a routine trip to the gym. He was 41 years old, a Harvard-educated law professor, a devoted father of 2 young boys, and by every account man with everything to live for. He never made it through the door. 2 bullets, close range. By the following morning, he was dead. Police had no suspects, no clear motive, no witnesses. The only thing they knew was that whoever did this had planned it carefully and had absolutely no intention of being caught. What followed was one of the most twisting murder investigations in modern American history, because the answer to who killed Dan Markell didn't lie with a stranger. It lay inside his own family. Markell had divorced his wife, Wendy Adelson, in 2013, and the split had turned bitter. Wendy's family, wealthy, tight-knit, and fiercely controlling, wanted her to move back to South Florida with the children. Markell was fighting it in court. To most people, that would be a frustrating but ordinary custody dispute. To Donna Adelson, Wendy's mother, it was something far more personal. She had even offered Markel $1 million to simply let the children go. He refused. Investigators began quietly building a case. Then in 2016, two men, Sigfrido Garcia and Luis Rivera, were arrested. Both had driven a rented Prius from Miami to Tallahassee the morning of the murder. Rivera eventually told prosecutors everything. The motive, in his own words, was simple. The lady wanted her kids back. The contract had been arranged through Donna's son Charlie, using his girlfriend Catherine Magbanua as the go-between. The price was $100,000. But was Donna herself involved? That was the question that would take 11 more years to answer. The FBI launched an undercover sting in 2016, sending an agent to approach Donna on a Miami street, posing as Rivera's brother and demanding hush money. Donna claimed she knew nothing, but she never called the police. She called her son. What she didn't know was that the FBI was already listening to every call, every word. The family switched the code. The murder became the TV. Payments became rent. But investigators had everything they needed. Financial records revealed that Magbanua had been quietly receiving paychecks from the Adelson dental practice for a job she never performed. Every check signed by Donna herself. Then came the moment that changed everything. As her son Charlie's guilty verdict was being read in November 2023, Donna Adelson was at Miami International Airport, boarding a one-way flight to Vietnam, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. She was pulled off the jet bridge, her phone seized as she resisted. On that phone, investigators found exactly what they were looking for: proof she had been researching Vietnamese extradition laws for weeks. At her 2025 trial, prosecutors revealed one final detail that left the courtroom speechless. While awaiting trial behind bars, Donna had allegedly written a script of false testimony and attempted to recruit a fellow inmate to recite it in court. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of solicitation. When the verdict was read, Donna gasped, burst into tears, and shook so violently that the judge had to remove the jury from the courtroom. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dan Markel's sons were toddlers when he was killed. They are teenagers now, old enough to understand exactly what their own grandmother did to their father. 5 people are behind bars for his murder. Prosecutors say the investigation is still not closed. Donna Adelson will almost certainly die in prison. And after 11 years, Dan Markel's family finally has an answer to the question that haunted them from the very beginning. Case 3, Karina Cooper. In the early hours of June 18, 2021, something woke the teenage son of Ryan and Karina Cooper. He heard his mother screaming, saw her rushing frantically between rooms, and watched as she handed him the phone mid-911 call and told him to talk to the dispatcher himself. When deputies arrived at the farmhouse in Traer, Iowa, they found Ryan Cooper slumped in his recliner, 2 gunshot wounds to the face. His body was already cold. Karina was sitting on top of him, screaming. Their 3 children were in the home. What she didn't tell police was that before she dialed 911, she had already called Ryan's brother. Ryan Cooper was a 42-year-old farmer, quiet, hardworking, a man his family said lived for his kids and his land. What he didn't know was that as far back as March 2021, his wife had been exchanging Snapchat messages with her lover, Houston Danker, a man whose hair she cut at her salon, making plans not just for an affair, but for a future without Ryan. In those messages, Karina called her husband a sperm donor, said she hated him, and told Danker she would be his wife. They even discussed having children together through IVF. Ryan Cooper had no idea any of it was happening. The case went cold for nearly 3 years. Then digital forensics cracked it open. Investigators recovered deleted Snapchat messages that reconstructed the entire conspiracy. Phone records showed Danker's phone passing the Cooper farmhouse 3 separate times between 9 and 10 p.m., hours before the killing, as though he was watching, waiting, timing his move. And then there was the single bullet casing left behind at the scene. Karina and Danker had tried to clean up. They missed one. That casing was matched to a Ruger 10-22 rifle connected to Danker. When Danker was cornered by investigators, he told police he had helped Karina kill her husband. Most chilling of all, just 1 hour before Karina called 911. Danker had sent her a message reminding her to remember those shell casings. At trial in July 2025, Karina took the stand and insisted she was the victim, that Danker had manipulated and threatened her, that she was scared of him, that she had nothing to do with Ryan's death. Then prosecutors asked her one question that cut through everything. Yet you are the same person texting Houston Danker telling him you will be his wife, correct? She had no answer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read, Karina broke down in tears. At sentencing, the judge gave her an opportunity to speak. She declined. Ryan's sister Michelle Wilson did not. She looked directly at Karina and told her to go to hell, and that no matter what Danker had tried to steal, he could never be Ryan. On September 19th, 2025, Karina Cooper was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Danker pleaded guilty weeks later and received the same. Case 4, Monica Sementilli. On the afternoon of January 23, 2017, 16-year-old Isabella Sementilli came home from school to find her father slumped in his patio chair, covered in blood. Fabio Sementilli, a celebrity hairstylist who had worked with Jennifer Lopez, had been stabbed 7 times from behind. His Porsche was missing. Police called it a botched home invasion. They were wrong. At the exact moment Fabio was being stabbed to death, his wife Monica was standing in a nearby Target store, eyes fixed on her phone. She wasn't shopping. She was streaming her home security cameras live, watching in real time as her lover carried out the murder she had spent months carefully planning. Monica had been secretly involved with Robert Baker, her racquetball coach, a former adult film actor and registered sex offender, for over a year. Together they plotted to kill Fabio for a $1.6 million life insurance policy. The plan was meticulous. Monica emailed Baker a detailed timeline of when Fabio would be home alone, disabled security DVR to destroy footage, and left the back door unlocked. Baker recruited a third accomplice, flew him in from Alaska, and the two struck while Monica built her alibi at Target. An $8,000 Rolex sat untouched on Fabio's wrist when police arrived. This was never about robbery. In the days that followed, Monica played the grieving widow, attending memorials, accepting condolences, even traveling to collect a posthumous award on Fabio's behalf. But she was celebrating Baker's birthday in Las Vegas just weeks later, and on the day of Fabio's burial, she was sending Baker explicit photographs of herself. From jail, she wrote him 4-page love letters signed Monica Baker till death. At trial, Baker took the stand and tried to take the fall, insisting he acted alone. Then the third accomplice testified that Monica had been directing Baker through text messages in real time from inside Target, telling him when Fabio was alone and giving the signal. She wasn't just involved. She was running the operation. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Ronald Cohen sentenced her to life without parole, calling her the prime mover in the execution of a human being. At sentencing, Fabio's sister called her the calculating architect of her brother's murder. Fabio Sementilli was 2 days away from his 20th wedding anniversary when he was killed. His daughter Isabella, the one who found him, told the court she would not let her mother's crime define her. It was the most heartbreaking line spoken in a case built entirely on betrayal. Case 5, Erin Patterson. On the morning of July 29th, 2023, Erin Patterson sent a warm message to her estranged husband's elderly parents and their relatives. She had a health scare. She told them, possibly cancer. She wanted to gather them together for a proper home-cooked lunch before things got harder. It felt like an act of love. It was an act of murder. Patterson lived alone in Leongatha, a quiet country town southeast of Melbourne. She and her husband Simon had separated years earlier, but remained civil, attending the same church, sharing custody of their children, even going on family holidays together. Prosecutors said that civility masked something much darker, and they said she had spent weeks preparing for this lunch in ways her guests never knew. Using a citizen science website that mapped wild mushrooms across Victoria, she had tracked down a cluster of death cap mushrooms growing nearby. Death caps are the most lethal mushrooms in the world. A single cap contains enough toxin to kill an adult. They have no antidote, and crucially, they taste pleasant when cooked. Patterson allegedly foraged them, brought them home, and dehydrated them into a fine powder, using a food dehydrator hidden in her kitchen. That dehydrator would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. But first, she needed to get rid of it. For guests arrived for lunch. Don and Gail Patterson, Simon's elderly parents, and Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson with her husband Ian. Patterson's children had been sent to a movie before anyone arrived. Simon had been invited but canceled the night before. Prosecutors said she hadn't expected that. She served each guest individual beef Wellingtons filled with mushroom paste and helped herself from a noticeably different plate. Smaller, a different color. 2 guests noticed it. Nobody said anything. They cleared their plates and went home. By the next morning, all 4 were violently ill. Doctors first suspected gastroenteritis. Then the toxicology results came back, and everything changed. All 4 had ingested amatoxins, found exclusively in death cap mushrooms. Gail and Heather died on August 4th. Don died the following day. Ian Wilkinson spent weeks in an induced coma. He survived and testified against Patterson at trial. In the days after the deaths, Patterson drove to a landfill and dumped the dehydrator. Investigators had already begun tracking her movements. They recovered from the rubbish death cap mushroom residue still coating the inside of the drum. She had also lied to police, denying she had ever foraged for mushrooms or owned a dehydrator. Phone records placed her at the exact site where the death caps had been spotted multiple times, in the weeks before the lunch. At trial, she claimed it was all a terrible accident, that she had bought dried mushrooms from an Asian grocery store and had no idea they were deadly. She testified for 8 days. Prosecutors pointed to the individually portioned plates, the fake cancer story used to lure the family, and one message she had written to Gail days before the lunch. I've spent many hours this week preparing lunch for tomorrow. I wanted it to be a special meal, as I may not be able to host a lunch like this again for some time. Prosecutors said she wrote that because she never expected anyone to survive to remember it. The jury found her guilty on all counts, 3 murders, 1 attempted murder. On September 8th, 2025, Erin Patterson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 33 years before parole. Don and Gail Patterson were 70 years old. Heather Wilkinson was 66. They went to a family lunch on a Sunday afternoon. They had no reason to be afraid. Case 6, Lucy Letby. Between June 2015 and June 2016, something deeply wrong was happening in the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital in England. Babies who had been stable, some even recovering well, were suddenly collapsing without warning. Doctors were baffled. Parents were devastated. And no one could explain why the death rate on that ward had quietly doubled. No one, except the nurses who had begun to notice something else entirely. Whenever a baby collapsed, the same name kept appearing on the rota. The same nurse had been present. Time and time again. At the moment, everything went wrong. That nurse was Lucy Letby. She was 25 years old when the deaths began. By all outward appearances, she was everything a neonatal nurse should be: dedicated, cheerful, and deeply committed to her patients. She volunteered for overtime regularly. She took salsa dance classes in her spare time. She sent parents thoughtful cards and kept footprints of the babies she cared for. Senior doctors raised concerns about her as early as 2016. Hospital management dismissed those concerns and forced those same doctors to apologize to her in writing. That decision cost lives. Police launched a formal investigation in 2018. What they found inside Letby's home stopped them cold. Tucked away among her belongings were handwritten notes, some of them appearing to be confessions. One read simply, "I am evil, I did this." Another, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them." She had kept post-it notes naming the babies she had cared for. She had kept their medical tags. At trial, prosecutors laid out the methods: injecting air into babies' bloodstreams, poisoning them with insulin, force-feeding them milk until their stomachs ruptured. 7 babies died. 6 others survived, but only barely. The trial at Manchester Crown Court lasted 10 months. It was one of the longest criminal trials in British legal history. Letby sat in the dock and pleaded not guilty to every single charge, repeating not guilty 18 times as the counts were read aloud. She never once attended court to hear her own sentencing. The judge had to issue a warrant to force her into the courtroom. On August 21st, 2023, Lucy Letby was sentenced to 15 whole life terms, one for each baby she murdered or tried to kill. She became the most prolific child killer in modern British history. But the case didn't end there. In 2025, an international panel of 14 medical experts reviewed all the evidence and concluded that the deaths were the result of natural causes or poor medical care, not murder. Netflix released a documentary questioning her guilt. Her legal team applied to Criminal Cases Review Commission, arguing she was wrongly convicted. Fellow inmates at HMP Bronzefield were reportedly mocking her over the documentary, telling her the appeal would fail. As of 2026, Lucy Letby remained behind bars. Her conviction stands. The families of her victims say the debate surrounding her case has only prolonged their suffering. 7 babies never made home from that neonatal ward. Their parents had trusted the hospital with the most fragile, precious lives imaginable. That trust, prosecutors say, was the very thing Lucy Letby exploited. Thank you for watching. If these stories matter to you, subscribe to Crime Whispers. New cases every week, told with facts, tension, and respect for the truth. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case.